we're going to begin talking about the Virginia Plan, and we'll kind of iron out the plans and the compromises that come from the Constitutional Convention, and then we'll end our conversation right there. It should be pretty brief. So, the Virginia Plan, also called the Large State Plan or the Randolph Plan, was attempting to solve the big state and small state debate that was happening in the Constitutional Convention. So the larger states put forward this plan. It was named the Randolph Plan after the delegate who introduced it, who was Virginia Governor Edmund Randolph. But James Madison actually devises the plan, so he writes it. So the Virginia Plan called for a two-house, and we know that that means a bicameral legislature. So remember that when you see that word bicameral, it means two houses, okay? And in class, I'm going to explain it to you like a two-layer cake. So the bottom layer is the larger of the two, and the top layer is the smaller of the two, okay? So this bicameral legislature, and in this Virginia plan, each state would have representation in both houses, and the representation would be based on population. So the more population you had, the more representatives you would have. This, of course, is going to greatly benefit the bigger, more populous states, such as Virginia. And so the smaller states refuse to accept this arrangement, and they instead are going to put forth their own plan, which is called the New Jersey Plan, that's going to help protect their interest. Okay, so Virginia Plan was put forth, the large state plan, and it called for representation by population. The New Jersey Plan, on the other hand, was supported by the smaller states. They're going to back this New Jersey Plan. It was introduced by former New Jersey Attorney General William Paterson, who's pictured here to the right. And the legislative branch under this arrangement would have to retain the structure of the legislature under the Articles of Confederation. So we would have a one-house legislature, and each state would have the same number of representatives in the legislature, regardless of how many people that they had. So equal representation, regardless of size. This would have protected the interests of the smaller states, but the larger states are going to reject this plan because as a larger state, as more people to represent, they feel like they should have a larger voice. And the delegates realize that we're going to have to reach some sort of compromise in order to ensure the convention isn't going to stall and that the Constitution is not going to get voted down. I have a really cool article to talk to you guys about with this, and at some point we'll talk about that in class. The Great Compromise, or what's also called the Connecticut Compromise. Delegate Roger Sherman is going to help break this deadlock over the issue of representation with a scheme that we now call the Great Compromise, or also the Connecticut Compromise. It's called Connecticut after Roger Sherman's home state of Connecticut. So this final plan is going to contain elements of both the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan. So just like the play that we talked about in class today, it's going to bring both sides together in order to try to compromise. And so it's also going to call for a bicameral legislature. Remember, two-layer cake. As with the Virginia Plan, population is going to determine the number of votes in the states in the lower house, which is going to be the larger body. We're going to call that the House of Representatives. And in the upper house, the Senate, the representatives are going to be equal. So we'll have equal representation in the upper house, representation based on population in the lower house. So we take apart from the Virginia Plan, apart from the New Jersey Plan, we come together and we make a compromise. Voters would elect members to the House of Representatives, but the legislature would get of each state would get to select the senators. So people get to vote for the lower house. The state senator or the state legislature in each state would elect the senators. And it's going to be like that until we ratify the 17th Amendment in 1913, that it now allows for people to elect those senators. So the House and Senate, what's the difference? The framers designed the House of Representatives and the Senate to fulfill different purposes in the new government. And since voters are going to directly elect House members, the chamber was intended to represent directly the views of the people. So they were more responsive to the people. When we talk about the structure of the Constitution, we'll also note how that was done. These are served 2-year terms, and they ensure that we get to vote for them regularly. So every 2 years, we're electing members to the House of Representatives. But the framers want to ensure that the House holds one exclusive power. So any bill that's designed to raise money to tax the people must originate in the House of Representatives. So it comes from the House of Representatives. The framers established the Senate as more advisory in nature than the House, and so the Senate receives the power to approve treaties negotiated by the executive branch, as well as to approve presidential appointments to government offices, such as cabinet and Supreme Court. And since the state legislatures originally appointed senators rather than having people elect them, the framers saw the Senate as catering more to the aristocratic elements of the people. And in addition, they serve 6-year terms. And it lowers the likelihood that state legislatures would remove them from office on political whims. Okay? So the Senate is more removed from the people originally, but we know today, and from 1913 to modern day, that we get to elect those senators to the Senate. What else comes from the Constitutional Convention? The 3/5 Compromise. And so we'll spend a little bit of time talking about this. The Virginia Plan's rule determining House membership by population is going to lead to another kind of thorny issue that's going to endanger ratification of the Constitution. And so the delegates from the northern states are going to insist that slaves are property and that they're counted for taxation purposes, but not representation. And since slaves didn't have the rights of citizens, it made perfect sense to them. But the Southern delegates, on the other hand, want to include the slave populations for purposes of representation, but not for taxation. So we want to get representatives, and we want to count as part of our population, but we don't want to have to pay taxes on them. Neither side is going to want to budge on this issue. And so, again, Roger Sherman and teamed up with Pennsylvania's James Wilson are going to propose the 3/5 Compromise. So, according to this compromise, 3/5 of the number of slaves would count toward both representation and taxation. So the North doesn't get the whole person counted. The South doesn't get the whole person exempted. So we come to this compromise. 3/5 of our slave population is going to count for representation and for taxation. The framers also take care that the 3/5 does not apply to Native Americans or those bound to service for a term of years, so those indentured servants that aren't there permanently. It only applies to slaves. Concession, the framers are also going to include a provision in the that Congress could not abolish the slave trade for over 20 years until 1808, and I'll just go ahead and tell you that in 1808 they do abolish the slave trade, which means we can't bring any new slaves in to the colonies. Or to the states then, sorry. The 3/5 Compromise is recognized as a major victory for the South, since slavery is going to continue virtually untouched, and Congress will rarely pass laws affecting direct taxation until after the 1860s. Okay, we have some discussion questions over this that I want you to look at. What were the main points of the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan? How did the Great Compromise solve the controversy between supporters of the Virginia Plan and those favoring the New Jersey Plan? What were some ways in which the House and Senate differed in philosophy and in function? What compromise did the framers reach in regards to slavery and representation? Okay, if you'll think about those questions, give me some responses to that, and we will use that content in class. Hope you have a great night. I will see you tomorrow.